Oh boy, there were a lot of people waiting on this lens right here, and now we finally have it. This is the Sigma 70-200 f2.8 DG-DN sports lens. And after all this time, did Sigma deliver? Yeah, in a pretty big way. Let's talk about it. So big thanks to Sigma Canada for putting me on the old embargo list, and I got to review the lens before it was actually released to the public. Of course, this is just a loaner. They don't get any input on the video. They don't know what I'm going to say. They probably don't care what I'm going to... They won't watch this video as far as I know. They have bigger fish to fry, and they have lenses to sell, and they are going to sell a lot of these lenses. It's too bad that I don't get to keep it. Do you think they'd miss it if I just kept it? They have barcodes and stuff. They would know. This lens is actually meant to accompany the 14-24 2.8 art lens, as well as the 24-70 2.8 art lens. So then you have a 2.8 trio that you can use. You are covered in pretty much every situation at quite a reasonable cost. And that's the thing. This is a reasonably priced lens. This lens is $1,500 USD. And seeing how the other Sony E-mount lens, that 70-200 f2.8, the G Master, is $2,800. This is a substantial savings. That's almost half the price. So let's talk about the construction here of this beautiful lens. It has 20 elements in 15 groups. Of course, it goes from 70 to 200. It has 11 rounded aperture blades. Its minimum aperture is f22, and the minimum focus distance at the wide end at 70 millimeters is 65 centimeters, and at the long end at 200 millimeters, it is 100 centimeters is the minimum focus distance. It has a 77 millimeter filter thread. It is available for L mount and Sony E-mount as well at this time. It's actually a pretty lightweight lens. It is 1,335 grams, and that is still heavier, of course, than the Sony G Master 70-200, which is about 1,035 grams. So it's about 300 grams heavier, but when you consider how much cheaper it is, and it's still quite lightweight, that is pretty good. The lens has weather sealing, it is dust and moisture resistant, and what will also help with that dust and moisture resistance is that the zoom is all internal, so there's no extension of the barrel as it zooms, so you're always going to keep that same balance while you are shooting, whether you're on a tripod or a gimbal or just handheld, and it will keep dust, debris, moisture from going inside the lens as you zoom in and out. I always love an internal zoom. It has a removable boot that will click around in 90-degree increments, and it has a little quarter 20 thread on the bottom of that boot, and it is also an Arca Swiss boot, which is great. You just put it in your Arca Swiss tripods. Oh, and this is one of my favorite features when it's on a lens, an aperture ring that can be clicked and declicked. I love that very much. Love an aperture ring on my lenses, and it also has a little lock button so that if you wanted to go into automatic mode, then you could lock it in automatic mode, or if you wanted to keep it in the manual aperture ring mode, you can lock it that way as well. It has a autofocus to manual focus switch. It has the focus distance. You can shoot it at full, or you can shoot it beyond 3 meters or closer than 3 meters. And it has 3 levels of optical stabilization. It has off. One is for your regular shooting and you're panning around, and then you'll have your sport mode in number 2 when you can go crazy and try to keep it as stable as you can when things are moving about frantically. Now, the optical stabilization on this lens is extremely impressive. At 70 millimeters, you get 7.5 stops of optical stabilization, which is great. And at 200 millimeters, you still get 5.5 stops of stabilization. And for someone like me who drinks way too much coffee and in general is an anxious person, that is just fantastic news. As soon as you half press your shutter button, you will see how stable your image becomes. Having a telephoto lens with that type of stability. It really, really helps you get your shots. It also has a switch for programming 2 custom modes, and it has 3 autofocus lock buttons along the lens so that whatever position you're holding it in, you can press one of those buttons. It has a sturdy lens hood that slips on very easily, and then you just have that little thumb screw to tighten it down, and that lens hood is also reversible to make it a little more compact as you travel. The lens is built extremely well. Love this lens. Love the way it's built. Love the way it looks. But like my wife likes to say, looks aren't everything, and I should bring more to the table than a pretty face, and this certainly does that. This lens is so sharp. Just take a look at this here at 70 millimeters, extremely sharp, sharp in the center, sharp to the corners, just excellent. And zoomed all the way in at 200 millimeters, it is exceptionally sharp in the center. It gets a little softer in the corners at 2.8 when you are zoomed in all the way to 200 millimeters, but for me, it is more than acceptable for this telephoto. The chromatic aberration control is great on this lens. Whether you're at 70 or you're at 200, the chromatic aberration is extremely well controlled. I don't see any really in my photos. The LOCA is a bit of a different story. It is still well controlled, but it is there. You can see it in the out of focus areas. You will see some longitudinal chromatic aberration, which is hard to correct in post, but it is a minimal amount. Another thing that there's not much of is focus breathing. The focus breathing, whether at 70 or 200, is very minimal on this lens, which is fantastic because, you know, when you pair it with the Sony bodies, you don't get that focus breathing compensation that the Sony bodies have, but you don't really need it with this lens because focus breathing is so well controlled. Good job, Sigma. And now let's take a look at the bokeh balls. Everybody loves taking a look at the old bokeh balls, and good news on this front as well. They are nice and round and very clean. Not the cleanest I've ever seen, but certainly plenty clean. Just a tiny little bit of onion ringing and a few artifacts here and there, but really absolutely nothing to complain about. Very pleased with that. And I'm also very pleased with the bokeh in general. It is very soft and very nice. Great fall off to have a zoom with this type of background separation that looks this nice and creamy. It's just really, really well done. Flaring and ghosting is also well controlled. It maintains contrast. You will see a little bit of flares here and there as it shoots out. So I would keep that lens hood on if I was shooting with bright lights or sunlight coming right into the lens. The autofocus is extremely snappy and reliable on this lens. They use that new Sigma HLA, the high response linear actuator system. So it's like floating. It's a bit like the one that Sony uses with their XD linear motors. This thing just floats and is super, super fast. Now, I will tell you, you are going to max out at 15 frames per second on the Sony cameras that can shoot higher frame rates. I don't have any cameras that shoot more than 15 frames per second, so for someone like me, it doesn't really matter. But if you are an A1 user or you're going to be an A9 III user and you want to get more than 15 frames per second, then you're not going to be able to do this with not just this Sigma lens, with any third-party lens at all. And that's not something Sony does, you know, as a cripple hammer type of thing. It's just that Sony has some of their own lenses limited to 15 frames per second, depending on the type of lens. So whenever you connect a third-party lens to a Sony body that can shoot high-speed shots, then it will default to that 15 frames per second. Whether or not the lens can keep up with it, because I'm pretty sure this one could, and hopefully there's some way to change that in the future, but as of right now, you will only max out at 15 frames per second. I say only. I don't have any cameras that shoot 15 frames per second. Now, if you're an L-mount shooter, you get a couple of extra goodies with this guy right here. It is compatible with the teleconverters for L-mount, and also you can make it a linear focus on L-mount cameras. On certain L-mount cameras, you can turn this lens into a linear focus so you can repeat your focus pulls, whereas on the Sony system, it will be a non-linear focus. The image quality coming out of this lens is fantastic. The colors, everything just pops right out of the frame. I really, really enjoy shooting with this lens, and at $1,500, wow, this is a real no-brainer for a lot of people. If you have an L-mount camera, just simply get this lens. If you have a Sony camera and you don't want to pony up $2,800 for the G Master 70-200 version 2, then I think this is a very solid replacement for that particular lens right there, and I'm thinking heavily about picking it up myself. Gonna go through the wife's purse, see what kind of change she has lying around, and maybe we'll get a Sigma 70-200, hey? So thanks to Sigma Canada once again for sending out this lens, and thanks for making another banger of a lens at a price that is pretty dang attractive to a person like me. I have a lot of Sigma glass. I can't stop buying it. It's such high quality at such good prices. Absolutely love what Sigma is doing over there. Don't stop, Sigma. Keep it going. I will spend more and more of my money on your stuff. And if you're not interested in this lens, tell me down below what lens you would be interested in, and we will have a nice little discussion about it. Thanks for watching this. We'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.